Welcome to Global Justice Report, an online production of the Center for Global Justice. I'm Cliff Durand, your host for today's program. The Center for Global Justice, El Centro para la Justicia Global, is a multinational and bilingual research center located in San Miguel de Allende, Mexico. The center is devoted to research and learning for a better world and empowering a solidarity economy. Due to the pandemic, we have had to discontinue our in-person events and instituted these online webinars. Without our previous revenue-generating programs, we now depend upon you for donations to support these webinars and to be able to pay our Mexican staff. You can donate at www.globaljusticecenter.org. Today's program will look at Mexico's fourth transformation, the project of Andrés Manuel López Obrador to transform Mexico, reversing the neoliberal programs that were instituted since the days of Carlos Salinas. We have with us today Bill Gallegos, who's a veteran Chicano liberation activist, an environmental justice leader, and revolutionary socialist. He will talk about the challenges that AMLO is attempting to overcome, and why Chicanos, Mexican Americans especially, should support this endeavor, and how. So let me turn the floor over to Bill. There will be opportunity for questions following, and we hope we can have a great discussion with him. All right, it's up to you, Bill.
Cliff, and thanks so much to the Global Justice Center and to Roberto for making sure that we're technically on the mark here. And I'm coming from Southeast Los Angeles, an African American and Latino working class community called Linwood. And we are in one of the most densely populated and regions of Southern California, and we also have the worst air quality in the country. So this is this is kind of a ground zero for a lot of environmental justice issues, and that's where I've been involved. I'm originally from Colorado, from the southern Colorado, from Pueblo, Colorado, and my family's originally from New Mexico and southern Colorado, from Mora in Nuevo Mexico, Raton, and then in Trinidad, Aguilar, those areas of southern Colorado that had a large concentration of Chicanos, Mexican Americans, who, like many, our family lost the land and ended up in the coal mines of southern Colorado, and we were active in helping our family was active in helping to build a union for coal miners, and was actually a part of the involved with the Ludlow massacre when striking coal miners were machine gunned by agents of the coal operators, largely the Rockefeller family. So that's a little bit about my background. As far as the fourth transformation, I'm uncertain if everyone's familiar with the first three transformations, but they refer to the Mexican War of Independence, which was successful in 1821, led by uh, 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 Guerrero and Victoria. And the first president of Mexico was Guadalupe Victoria. So that's the first transformation to end Spanish and later French domination and control. Then there was La Reforma, which happened in and was led by Benito Juarez in 1857. And then the third transformation is the Mexican Revolution. Of course, we know about the work of Pancho Villa and Emiliano Zapata. So the fourth transformation, so the third transformation promised a lot of things. The Mexican Revolution promised a lot of things, but especially it made the promise to the campesinos, the peasantry, of land reform. And there's a very significant movie called La Revolución Helada that never happened, the Frozen Revolution, that it was incomplete and a large, most of the land ended up in the hands of what became the Mexican oligarchy, and which is one of the reasons for the more recent Zapatista uprising. So those are the three transformations. And when Morena, when López Obrador and Morena won power, electoral power, in 2018, the president promised a fourth transformation, and this resonated strongly with the Mexican people who had supported Morena overwhelmingly. Local elections, regional elections, state elections, the parliament, and of course the presidency showed massive popular support for Morena and AMLO. And the meaning of the fourth transformation, as outlined by AMLO, was a nation of laws where nothing is outside the law, no one is above it. The security services would be reformed so that no one was spied upon, and religion, ideas, and the right to dissent would be respected. For true democracy, guaranteeing free elections and prisons for electoral fraud, which the PRI and the PAN, the previous ruling class parties, were infamous for their electoral fraud. He called for an end of corruption and said the law should apply not only to government officials, but also to their families. And this makes me think of the recent election in the Philippines, where the son of Ferdinand Marcos was recently elected to the presidency. He said he would reform the Constitution so that even the president could be prosecuted for corruption, and called for a popular consultation, a consulta, after 3 years to determine whether the president himself should be recalled. He insisted that luxuries such as high salaries for government officials, the presidential airplane, official residence, bodyguards, pensions should be cut or eliminated. He called for increased attention to the needs of rural communities, the revitalization of the construction industry, improvements in the energy sector, pensions for elderly Mexicanos, free medicine, and improved education with access for all. So this is, it's not a socialist program, but it's a populist program, a populist in the good sense, that this was meant to respond to the needs of the people whose primary concerns were corruption and the massive wealth inequality that exists in Mexico and, of course, here in the United States. And there was mass support for this, as reflected, in the elections, where they received overwhelming popular support in those elections, and later in the 2020 elections, that electoral support was reaffirmed. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the context in which all of this is happening. So one of the important elements of this, of what's going on in the world, is the growing pink tide in Latin America. So that tide of left-leaning, populist, or even revolutionary governments includes Cuba, Venezuela, Bolivia, Mexico, Peru, Chile, perhaps Nicaragua, Argentina. And it looks like left-leaning governments could very well win power in Brazil, Colombia, and Costa Rica. This is happening nowhere else in the world. Nowhere else in the world is this happening. It's not happening in Asia. It's not happening in Europe. There's nowhere else where this kind of popular movement to the left is happening and being affirmed in these electoral victories. So this is part of the context that supports the work of AMLO and Morena. It's mutually reinforcing. And of course, within this pink tide, countries like Mexico, with its size, its proximity to the United States, its economy, is extremely important. So the victory of the fourth transformation, the victory of AMLO and Morena, is very, very critical within this context. Another part of the context is that we can't forget the challenges that are faced by AMLO and Morena to implement the fourth transformation. The oligarchs of Mexico, they haven't gone away. They still control the economy of Mexico in large part. They're still tied with the established political parties, the PRI and the PAN. They have control of the media, the mainstream media, which is relentless in its attacks on AMLO and Morena. And they have extensive ties to U.S. imperialism, which sits across the border. And of course, there is the Mexican military, which is not like the military in Venezuela. So these are some of the challenges that they face. Another consideration that's very, very important in all of this, and I think makes the progress that they've achieved really significant, is Morena is a relatively new party. They're not well established. So they have the challenge of governing and consolidating and developing and expanding their leadership core. So these are significantly important elements for any party to establish itself. And so this is something that we have to look to beyond AMLO, because there's a 6-year term. He's out in 6 years. He was elected in 2018. So in 2024, his term is up. So this is very, very significant that they have to do this. And since they've won power and they're an open party, there's a lot of opportunists who want to come in and say, we know how to govern. We know how to keep the roads clean, the streets clean, and build roads and run schools. And these are people who have been tied with the PRI and the PAN, who want to come in and they bring with them, the sugar-coated bullet. So these are some of the challenges that they face. So I just want to talk about some of the things that they have been able to accomplish during this time. Some of the really important successes of the fourth transformation. So one is something that we're all familiar with, which is they support and gave legal support to the creation of independent trade unions. So we know that the old Confederación was very, very intimately tied with the oligarchy and with the PRI and the PAN, and did not represent the real interests of the working class of Mexico. They were always ready to sell out and cut bargains with foreign corporations, Mexican corporations, and so on. So now there has, as we've seen with Cintia in Silao, the General Motors workers have unionized, created an independent union, and this movement is now beginning to spread in other parts of Mexico. So this is very, very significant. But it wouldn't happen unless there had been support from Morena and AMLO. This is extremely, extremely important that they were doing this because there's been efforts before to create independent unions and they have not been successful. But this time they didn't have the troops coming in and knocking them down and shooting them down. So this is extremely important, I think, very important part of this fourth transformation. So there's some of the other parts of this that I want to try to refer to here. And I'm going to kind of bring up my some of the notes on this. Oh, I want to say something else that's very important in terms of the I don't know if it's part of the fourth transformation, but is AMLO's stance towards the Summit of the Americas that the United States is hosting in Los Angeles, and in which he has said that he will boycott this summit unless Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua are allowed to attend. And this is huge. This was going to be a big photo op for the Biden administration and for the United States, and they wanted to highlight their continued, I think, neo-colonial relationship to the rest of Latino America. And I think this is a very important. It's symbolic, but it's meaningful for something like this to happen. So I think that's something that we should keep in mind here as we're trying to understand this, or what's going on in Latino America. So some of the things that are going on now. One of the principal programs is in the system of education. under the Morena leadership, under AMLO's leadership, 100 new universities are being constructed in states where access to higher education has been the lowest. So that's just one element of this fourth transformation. I wish we were getting 100 new universities in the United States in areas where access to higher education has been in the lowest, especially Black, Brown, and Indigenous and API communities. Mexico's Salud Popular, its health system, is being completely rebuilt. AMLO has described the old system as being neither healthy nor popular. While all state and federal workers have health coverage, the rest of the population has had to depend on Salud Popular. In remote rural areas, those who practice traditional medicine, curanderos, hueseros, and others, can be more effective for treating basic elements, and they are being supported and encouraged by AMLO and Morena. Hospitals and clinics abandoned for decades have been rebuilt, are back in operation in many states. Mexico's energy system is being completely revamped. The national Pemex has been reclaimed by the government, not as a private. There was efforts to privatize Pemex. Now this is a contradiction that's very, very important, because we know that climate change is real. It's destroying Mother Earth, and the situation is very, very grave. But countries like Mexico and Venezuela and others who are reliant on fossil fuels have this dilemma that they want to create and expand programs like in healthcare and education, but where do they get the resources? Where do they get the money to do these programs? So they're faced with this question of having to, even while they want to transition out of fossil fuels to clean energy, and the demand of the global South is that this should be funded by the nations like the United States and Europe and Japan that have created the crisis, but they still have to rely a lot on the resources from fossil fuels. So this is an area where there's been contradictions with the Mexican environmental movement, and understandably so. And this is an area where, at least compared to the PRI and the PAN, they will get a hearing. They will not be crushed as they pursue their demands for climate justice. So these are some of the things that are going on within Mexico in terms of the fourth transformation. And I think this is, there's issues. I think the rural transformation is very important because the question of the land continues to be central to the Mexican Revolution and central to the fourth transformation. And so the question of development in rural areas, including even with controversial products like Tren Maya, because a lot of these they are the poorest and most underdeveloped areas of Mexico. How does the government, Morena and AMLO, help to support the development of these areas in a healthy way? And that's an exceedingly part of this fourth transformation, of putting resources, looking at land issues, doing what they can. So this is not Morena's not a revolutionary party. They're not expropriating the land and redistributing it to the peasants, but they're trying to take steps that can really begin to support the efforts of people in the rural areas to build their economy, to build infrastructure, to build their education and healthcare systems. And this is all part of the fourth transformation. So this is something, it's a populist program. It's something in here that's somewhat akin to our New Deal that happened after the Depression, during the Depression here in the United States. But it's extremely meaningful for the tens of millions of working class and peasantry in Mexico. It's extremely meaningful for many of the small business owners and people who are part of the informal economy. All of these measures are extremely important. Pensions for the elderly, we may take that for granted here for most of us, not for the undocumented who pay into Social Security but don't get a damn thing. But for me, por ejemplo, I rely on my Social Security every month. I'd be out on the street. I'd be homeless without that. So these kinds of things, pensions for the elderly, are incredibly meaningful as part of this fourth transformation. And I'm very impatient with leftists who are ready to denounce AMLO and denounce Morena, and they're not doing enough, and they're not moving fast enough. Of course, no none of us are without faults or problems or errors or whatever. But I think to understand just how significant this is, these steps that are being taken in Mexico to begin to really change what has been a very horrendous system of corruption and inequality in Mexico. So I think these are all very, very important. And I want to just say that, for Mexico, there's a real common thread that they have with us, with Chicanos and Mexican Americans here in the United States. And this is the question of the annexation of Mexico's northern territories by the U.S. in the 1840s. That annexation enabled the United States, one of the main factors in it becoming the dominant superpower in the world, the dominant capitalist superpower in the world. It gave us incredibly wealthy land, wealthy and some of the most fertile lands in the world, enormous mineral and resource deposits, as well as all of this land available for its settler colonial population, primarily white settlers that allowed for the expansion and growth of the U.S. population, and also to create a port system that gave them access to the Pacific Rim and allowed for that trade. And it connected the United States, the transportation system that was built, the railroad system that went from coast to coast, connected the United States as an integral economic entity. This was huge. For the conquered population of these annexed territories, for the indigenous and Mexican American populations, it meant repression, it meant dispossession from our lands, and it meant an institutionalization of oppression in every realm of life: education, healthcare, wealth, unemployment, poverty, language, culture, mass incarceration. And I'm not just talking about in our state and federal prison systems, I'm also talking at the border with ICE. So all of this was put into place following the annexation as part of the consolidation of that annexation. So it had a huge impact on the Mexican American population in those territories, an impact which continues because all those systems of oppression remain in place, including the lack of voting rights, political representation, all of those pieces of the oppression of the Chicano people. For the nation of Mexico, it meant now dependency, a neo-colonial relationship with the United States. So if Mexico had held on to its northern territories, it might be like Germany. I mean, we don't know if it would have been socialist or whatever, but if it had remained a capitalist power, it would have probably had enormous economic clout and been something akin to a capitalist nation like Germany. So that would have considerably altered its relationship with the United States imperialism. Instead, what we have is a relationship of dependency, and of course the United States hasn't hesitated to invade both militarily and economically and politically into the life of the Mexican people. So this is very, very significant. But what it means is that this red thread of history, this annexation, really ties together the Chicano Mexican American people and the people of Mexico, the popular movements of Mexico. Because of course there's been much cross-border traffic. And now today, we represent almost 40 million people. Our population is almost 40 million people. That's huge. That's larger than most nations in the United Nations. It's a huge population situated on a mostly 1,200 mile strip of the border between U.S. and Mexico in the areas where we have historical residency: Texas, Arizona, Southern Colorado, Nuevo Mexico, California, areas strategically important to the United States. And just think about the strategic importance electorally of this population. Without our votes, the Democrats don't win. Trump wins California, New Mexico, Colorado, Nevada, Arizona. All of these areas where the Democrats have now been able to win both congressional seats, Senate seats, and the presidency, largely, not exclusively, but largely because of the Chicano vote. So just from that point of view, this is a strategically important region with many, many ties, economically, socially, politically, culturally, and historically with the people of Mexico. So the sad part of this is that most of us here do not know what's going on in Mexico. A lot do. There's Morena chapters all over the Southwest. I mean, it's pretty amazing. But most folks don't know what's going on. They don't know what the fourth transformation is. They don't know the significance of this social experiment for the people of Mexico, for our fight, for our equality and self-determination, and for the people of Latin America. This is extremely important, this experience, and it goes beyond AMLO. It goes to whether Morena can consolidate and govern effectively and continue the efforts to achieve the fourth transformation. So this is some of the significant issues that we on the left, both in Mexico and here, need to understand. And then we need to understand, how do we build cross-border solidarity? So I'm part of a project along with Meju and others called the Mexico Solidarity Project, and that's what we're trying to do. Like right now, our focus is on building support for the independent labor movement in Mexico, Cintia, what's going on in Silao, to build support for concrete struggles that are taking place in the popular movements that are part of this effort to build a really populist, in the good sense, structure in Mexico, and to begin to really reduce, significantly challenge the power of the oligarchy and U.S. imperialism. So this is really one way we can do this, is to become connected with organizations like the Mexico Solidarity Project, like the Global Justice Center. And one of the things I think that's extremely important, especially for those of us on this side, is to really do mass popular education about this, what's going on with Morena and the movement in Mexico, the movements in Mexico, and the fourth transformation. Because we definitely need a fourth transformation here in the United States and along the border and in Chicano communities. We need a fourth transformation. We're punished for speaking our own language. We're jailed for walking down the street. My son, Ramon, who works at United Parcel Service, he works in the warehouse, straight as can be. He's been stopped by the cops 6 times. He's a young man. Twice they pulled guns on him because he wears his hair short, because he wears white t-shirts, lo que sea. So this is kind of the reality that's faced by so many of us. And we can take inspiration from what's going on in Mexico. We can learn from it. We can share what we're doing. These ties need to develop, especially now that we have social media. There's no excuse for us not developing the kinds of information and popular education that can really help us understand what's going on. And I'm grateful to the Global Justice Center for doing this. And we just need about 1,000 more. Thank you very much. And I apologize for my sniffles.
Thank you, Bill. We want to open the floor for questions and comments. Some are watching this on YouTube. And if you are on YouTube, you can get your question to us by sending an email to global.justice.cliff@gmail.com. And I will pass it on to to those in the Zoom room.
Thank you, Glenn.
And those who are in the Zoom room, you can raise your questions directly. You do so by raising your hand or waving at me, and I'll call on you. All right, Norma Harrison is first.
Well, it's a major complaint, and I hope a lot of us have this complaint. It seems that there are rules that we're supposed to follow according to the stringent leftists among us. I won't say it here in the United States or maybe here in California, wherever we are, judging the achievements that have been gained throughout the world, as complicated as they are, as limited as they are, as under fire as they are, and so on. People have gained great access to control of their operations where they live. And this is being dismissed as not being done right. It's really infuriating to hear those criticisms those negative, well, they're not distributing the land. Well, they haven't commandeered the military, etc. So all the
No,
things.
I totally agree with you. It's interesting because, one of the most important new programs that AMLO has is called Sowing Life, and he's trying to communicate that there's a huge quantity of communal property, and the intention of rescuing collective property is one of the main points in his transition towards the economic transformation they want to achieve. But you're right. They can't just, they don't yet. There's not the Venezuelan military here, and there's not a people's army that can go in and reclaim the land. There is a Via Campesina in Mexico, which is doing important work. But I think, there's so many North American leftists. I get so frustrated. You know, they can't organize their way out of a paper bag, but they're ready to tell everybody in Nicaragua and Venezuela and Bolivia, Mexico, how they should run their country, how they should run their social movements. And I think that's, there's a lack of humility that comes with that, as well as, like you say, some dogmatism. This is how it was done by the Bolsheviks. Why haven't you done it? So I think that's where our educating, those of us who I think have a more sober reflection on this, and I think embody some of that humility. Say, you know, we don't say this is utopia. Nobody's ever claimed that, but there are important things going on here that people need to understand and support.
I don't say it's humility. I say it's stupidity outright. It's ignoring what we've been doing and ignoring, and I agree, maybe they're justified. I read, there's a book John Howard Lawson has written, Our Forgotten Heritage, of our history of risings and suppressions and risings and suppressions. And if people don't get it, what those are, maybe they need to be transported back by some magic into those times and see about struggling for justice and see about the wrath that it raises by the owners, by our dear owners.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a note going up on the chat. If you do, are you reading the chat? I guess
Yeah,
it.
it says, I'll read this. It's from Meju Louis in Hawaii. Meju, thank you. As we face the loss of reproductive rights in the U.S. going backward for gender equality, Mexico is moving forward. On the other hand, feminists are taking to the streets to protest continuing femicides. Can you comment on gender issues in Mexico and the fourth transformation? Well, thank you, Meju. I'm not that knowledgeable. But I think this is huge. Is that just as we're going back on women's control of their bodies here, that Mexico has taken this step forward. I think that's huge. But there's no doubt there's been massive protests uh, uh, led by women in Mexico against the femicides and against domestic violence that need to be taken very, very seriously. And I think different from the prior administrations, there's a response from AMLO and Morena. It has a ways to go, but there's an engagement with this issue, and I think some steps that have been taken to try to address these issues. But there's not going to be a transformation overnight, even on this. And I think it's important that social movements continue to exert this kind of pressure.
We
I,
have
I
to. We
think I
have.
think we should be supportive of it, and I think it's very, very important. And it's what I would say is this is one of those contradictions among the people that happen. Um, but it's a very, very important issue that needs to be taken seriously.
I think we haven't. I certainly haven't take and take a be aware of the suppression of women. Women, half the population of the earth, has been such an enormous suppression. The idea of telling us we have to bear the result of sexual intercourse, which has been raised in some societies to a behavior that everybody is supposed to worship practically. Anyway, half the people on the earth have been enslaved to the policies about women, and where they are, and that housework is denigrated or any work. I mean, all work is equal to all work. All work is
Yeah, but this femicide thing is in Mexico. It's, it's what, over 900 that we know of in the last several years. I mean, these are massacres.
Bruce Hudson has joined us. Do you have anything you want to say? Looks like you're riding on a bus and seem to have a better internet connection than I do. In fact,
Okay, you guys. Yeah. Rachel and I are on a train, actually, going to the extreme north of California. Because there's a lot of noise here, and I didn't want to do that. But just one thing with respect to what Meiju just mentioned, really important, and also thanks Meiju on that. Something to mention is that abortion is absolutely legal and free throughout the entire country. And for anyone who might be interested in learning even more about what has happened over the last number of years in Mexico with respect to women's reproductive rights, do check out the last issue of our bulletin from the Mexico Solidarity Project, in which we have an interview with Veronica Cruz, who is the director of an organization called Las Libres, based in León, Guanajuato, near us. This is an organization that has been providing acts since long before abortion was legal in Mexico, to women, actually not just in Guanajuato, but throughout the country, and even have bring in women from the state of Texas into Mexico for abortions. And there's a lot more to that, and I would encourage people to check out the last issue of the Mexico Solidarity Project bulletin.
Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you.
Hey, Clay.
I'm gonna mute.
okay, Clay Slate has also raised his hand.
I'm in Morelia. My wife and I moved down here in 2007. We only live here. We spend 90% of our lives in Spanish. As soon as I got here, I won't go over to Spanish. Bueno, puedo yo hablar por un momento en español. Para mí no es difícil. Estoy estudiando todas estas cosas por la tele, por radio, por libros, con compañeros en español. Muchas veces sigo yo aprendiendo todo, pero en realidad soy estadounidense. I'm a gringo. I live here. I try to keep learning because that's the most important. And I really look for people who will lead me. Right now, our biggest activism for my wife and me is in migration issues and issues of helping migrants. Recently, someone from Guadalajara Wednesday night was here that has an organization in Guadalajara, is mainly helping deported people. The week before, we're with Haitians here in Morelia and working with Haitians. We both sit on the state council for making recommendations to the state legislature about migrants. Our group is Migrantes por Migrantes, and we are extranjeros, but we know that we are migrants and people are helping us all the time. And we couldn't make it without them. Okay, every day I say, help me with this. Okay, and my Spanish is excellent, but I also, in many places, I just need help as a human being. We try to do the same. That's just a little bit about who we are. Very quickly, thank you, Bill. I appreciate you. I take many of the same attitudes you do toward AMLO and toward Morena. There are good reasons that all kinds of progressives here would be doubtful. They were many raised under the PRI, which called itself the Revolutionary Party. People like Echeverria and others like that were worldwide known as radical leftists until they began killing students in Mexico City. And then the PRD came up under Cardenas in '88 when Salinas took over, and everybody thought the PRD was the left. And in fact, AMLO was PRD. And yet I suffered here under two PRD governors. We just got rid of Silvano. And in my opinion, well, I won't go into things that I don't know for sure.
Yeah.
We
There
have
was Guatemoc. Yeah, I know. A lot of people had a lot of hope.
Right. And Cardenas speaks here. You see him around here occasionally. He's from here. He was governor here in Michoacan. But the complexity of the of Mexican politics, you never see a protest on the streets. In Morelia, we can have 4 or 5 protests going on per day. The cops will stop one protest so the other one can get through. You more normally can't get through. I love Morelia. I think it's great. We'll never have any industry here because they won't come. I understand why. Okay. It's tremendous activism in Morelia. But many times, if you don't understand who's behind a particular protest, a particular manifestation, then you don't know what's happening. You think what they're carrying for their signs is what's happening. That's not what's happening. It's about something else. Real quickly, so that's kind of like that. That's about infighting in the left. I try to keep all of the people that I think probably really are progressive talking to me and explaining what they can see or what they wanted or where they see one group come in and get all the government positions. Their group was in there working hard too, and they had all the government positions, all of that stuff. Quickly, Bill, I really appreciated your coverage. I need, and you don't get it from the main media, and I read the Jornada all the time, and I read the Reforma, and I read the La Voz here, and I read the Proceso every week. My wife's out right now coming back with my new Proceso from yesterday. And they all consider them, or the Proceso and the Jornada, they consider themselves liberals.
Yeah.
But then that's like reading The Guardian last week, that you think, oh, The Guardian's going to tell me stuff. And then you find a hit job on AMLO because they want to talk about the murder of a journalist in Tijuana, and they use it to smear AMLO in their subtitle. Yeah. And I wrote them a letter to the editor, and then I just didn't send it because I wasn't going to go back down and read. But you think so much of what you think is going to give you insightful, sophisticated, progressive stuff. We need so much more. And I listen to the Mañaneras, and I appreciate AMLO, but he is a politician, okay? He will dodge questions, and I like him because he talks slow, so I can understand everything he's talking about. Okay?
Is it worth it for you to tell us what drew you to that location to live? I assume you weren't living there originally.
Oh, so the best climate in the world. You can keep the windows open all the time. The food's fabulous. The culture's excellent. It has the second oldest university in the Americas. It's been here it's got 100,000 college students. The security sucks. So keep your eyes open. It's a wonderful place. We love Morelia. It's 900,000 people. It's a good place.
Yeah.
I will stop. Give me one more minute and I'll get off my, I went around and around. I need more meat on the bones on every single one of these questions about where we're getting with the unions. I need more meat on the bones about what we've done, what he's done with oil. I'm fearful about the possibility he may totally militarize the police and then turn it over to the next administration. Okay, they haven't improved security much at all. From what I heard, let's see, Bruce, I heard you talking about abortion rights in Mexico. That hasn't been my experience here in Michoacan, that rich women can get an abortion. My understanding of that, really, that kind of access has not been the same. Almost every issue you brought up, I don't see. He needed the teachers to get the votes. Okay, so he made his deal with the teachers in 2018, and that got him 10,000 tough guys at all of the voting booths. Okay, they had tough people everywhere. It wasn't going to be possible to steal it again like in 2006 and 2012, but that was something of a deal with the devil. Yes, it's a tremendously powerful union. It's the most powerful union in Latin America, the Mexican Teachers Union. But we're all stuck someplace. The schools aren't getting very far. And I'm a teacher. I'm in favor of unions, but I don't see independence coming in over there. I need any place I can get as much meat on the bones as I can get about how this is working. I'm for it.
Well, no, I think as someone who's there, you understand the context in which they're working. So, it's 4 years. It's 4 years. It's not 40. It's 4 years in which they're trying to end the drug war. Even the thing on the police, trying to create a national, 5 years, trying to create a national, well, they have 6 years, but they're only 4 years in.
Yeah.
So they're he's trying to create a national police force, says ending the drug war, trying to create a national police force. It's not surprising that there's challenges and difficulties, and I can only imagine, because I see it with a lot of the folks that kind of got into the Bernie's campaign. It drew literally hundreds of thousands of new activists in, but it drew a lot of opportunists into it, who kind of went into the Democratic Socialists of America, went to the Democratic Party, and that's part of the life that we have to deal with. And so I think there's going to be just a lot of unevenness to all.
I wouldn't call them opportunists. They're a lot of those people who appear to be opportunists are using the advancements to, further themselves to a degree, but they're trying to figure it out, and they just don't know shit.
Yeah. Well, I guess what the point I'm trying to make is here. I don't think that trying to explain the significance of the fourth transformation and the victories of Morena and AMLO, and what some of the things that they've tried and some of the things that have worked, some of the things that haven't. I think that's important to understand. I think what's important for us, I think for me to grasp, and for folks like me, is what's the trend here and what is its potential. So I think the potential is really, really significant. It's significant for Mexico, first of all, but also for us here and for Latin America, for this experiment to be successful. But no doubt they're working, they're using it, like Audre Lorde says, they're having to use a lot of the master's tools. And that, it can be helpful, but it can also be very, very, very difficult in doing that. And like I was saying, they have to be able to effectively govern. So in trying to do all these new programs, you got to make sure you keep the lights on.
Let me say you're right.
And I wish we had 10,000 teachers ready to go to the voting booths here in the United States.
They got the pensions for the old people. Okay, they got them up a lot. They got the minimum wage up a lot. They got the scholarships for the university students up a lot. Sembrar Vida is working. It's not great, but it's working. Yeah. They got the new airport built. Okay. And when I say meat on the bones, I'm not saying they're not getting meat on the bones. I don't know where to find it.
Yeah.
I don't know where to see it in the data so that when I'm talking to other people, I can truly measure myself and communicate about it. I interrupted, but I didn't want to be pulling back. I think stuff's happening.
Yeah.
I didn't mean to be saying I didn't think it was happening. I'm just
No,
looking,
no, I got you. I
for
got
the
you.
evidence. I want to be able to communicate the evidence.
How about other folks? What are other folks thinking on this, or other questions?
Is he the speaker? Who's the speaker? Oh, okay. Can he be asked a question?
Okay, we have a question from the from a YouTube viewer, and I'd like to screen. Michael Kent asks you to speak to overcoming the resistance of the liberals within Mexico to the fourth transformation. All the material achievements of Morena and the support of the working class. There's a large portion of the population called the so-called middle class, who are adamantly opposed to AMLO. Why is that?
Yeah, the other, it's a good question. I think, we tried to speak to some of the achievements that have been achieved so far in the Salud Popular and in the area of land reform, land distribution, land protection, the services to the elderly, support for education, resources for education, killing the bad airport and building the good airport. So I think there's a number of specifics we pointed to. And again, I want to emphasize the importance of the support for the independent union movement, because ultimately there needs to be a strong and independent voice for the working class. That's in any country. We need that here. And so I think this is an incredible, and I think it's also an incredibly fertile area for solidarity between the union movement here, the workers' movement, which includes more than unions, worker centers, and so on, and for like Chicanos and Mexican Americans to support this really critical movement, which is really part of Mexico's majority. The working class is the majority. So I think this is an area that we can point to as having immediate benefit, but also potentially really long-term implications, very important long-term implications for the struggle in Mexico.
We have a question here from Julie Durand, who's sitting here next to me.
Hello.
Hello.
I finally see the speaker. I would like a question specifically on the termination of NGOs by the president. I know some fabulous nonprofits that have done incredible work that now are lacking funding to continue. Why do you think he would do something like that? If he is supporting campesino organizations,
would you please mute Bill's? Would you?
I don't have anything on. What is that problem?
Yeah, just go ahead and speak
Okay.
loud.
I'll speak loud. I just want an answer about why would he terminate no organizations because of corruption when there are hundreds of them that are doing excellent work here. And the money has been put in the hands of individuals that have lost an incentive to work. And these people that used to work on their NGOs were more productive during the times of corruption in Mexico than they are now. I would like to know, what do you think about that?
Thank you, Julie. Unfortunately, I'm not familiar with the issue and with what's going on, but I don't know if Bruce or other camaradas in Mexico are familiar with that issue. It sounds very important.
Bruce?
We missed most of what she said, so
or-
it's hard to understand the point she was trying to get across. Maybe if she could repeat it.
You repeat it, Cliff. You can repeat it.
The question had to do with the AMLO's ending of subsidies to NGOs, which have left them without funds. They've provided many valuable services, but are less able to do so now. And so the question is why? Clay, you want to speak to that?
Yeah, and I'll try not to be too blah blah. It hits on the question of lack of middle class support too. There are a variety of places that the Mexican government had for a long time put money through intermediaries to get services out to people. In a lot of cases, I think it was the perception of the AMLO government that many of those intermediary organizations had become their own little kingdoms. That was their perception, that they had become their little kingdoms of people who had middle class incomes that they could keep that way. But that many cases, that was not the most economical way to do things. So as they did rebudgeting, they decided in a lot of cases just to cut a whole lot of those organizations out and go straight. They thought that was better. The critique is that they have created a clientelism now, that they're buying votes. That's the critique of it. Whether it's, you'd have to get closer to the truth. Another thing the middle class doesn't like is that these university scholarships only go to you if you go to public universities. And the middle class has often preferred to send their kids to the Catholic universities or that sort of thing, and you don't get a dime for that. Okay, you've got to go to a public university. These types of things have happened inside of what's called Republican austerity, and that's the type of austerity that the AMLO government has followed, which in fact has been quite austere. AMLO came in and said he was not going to add to the public debt. He had watched Calderon and Peña Nieto come in and indebt the country a great deal more, which makes Mexico less able to defend itself in the neoliberal world. But when he cut down a lot of the money, things that middle-class people like, for example, a tremendous amount of money that went to academia for postdocs, that kind of work. Suddenly that work wasn't there, or money going to ENA. And I'm not saying that, I mean, I got friends that do that work or have done that work, but a lot of the reorganization of money, it's where you go anywhere, follow the money, go look at the budget, okay? And you'll see who's mad because the money doesn't come anymore. That's a thumbnail sketch, but that's how I see it.
Thank you, Cliff.
Speak to this, I believe.
Cliff, can I chime in on that one?
Yes, please.
I think that AMLO's fight against corruption has yielded a lot of money that has been used for social good. One of our interviewees said once, though, that sometimes he uses a hatchet when he should be using a scalpel, so that in the course of the cuts that have been made, some good programs have probably been hit as well. So it's hard to say, but overall, the fight against corruption has been a good one. And I think we know from the United States that, yeah, some NGOs do good work, but not all. And of course, you're mad if you lose your own job or organization. So, yeah. And in terms of the middle class, I mean, I definitely supported government funds only going to public schools in the United States and not to Catholic schools. So I'm with AMLO on that one as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Major. And thank you, Cliff.
In addition to the middle class opposing, much of the left in Mexico has become highly critical of him as well. Why is that?
Well, I'm not, again, I'm not entirely familiar, but I would venture from what I do know that some of it are criticisms that are well deserved, and that's a good thing because otherwise there's no change. And I think this is very different from the previous administrations where, that was all irrelevant. But I think some of it may come from, expectations that change was going to be farther along than it was, that it was going to come with fewer challenges and bumps in the road, and maybe expectations that um, were not totally based in reality. So I don't know. I'm kind of basing that on some of the experience that I've had here, where when we put progressives in certain places where to achieve change, like for example, we had a very progressive indigenous Chicana who was head of environmental justice for the Biden administration, and she was catching all kinds of hell from some of the environmental justice folks here who expected a major transformation. First of all, they overlooked a lot of the important work that was happening, but expected a major transformation in 2 years. And so I don't know if it's a similar situation in Mexico, but sometimes that's an affliction I know the U.S. left has. And sometimes I think it's not knowing how to engage in a way that's both productive and critical. I think those are things that we're trying to learn still. But I would rely on camaradas in Mexico who would understand the situation with these kinds of criticisms than I am.
I would like to add something. I live in Mexico with Mexicans, very little contact with the expats here. The middle class expectations were that the money was going to be going to them, and it didn't. It went down to those that needed it most. And second, there is a fear, a tremendous fear that the fourth transformation and AMLO will become a Fidel Castro, a Hugo Chavez, and the middle class in Mexico are petrified of it. So they're totally close to looking at the positives of a good education and healthcare that is so needed, and worrying a lot about perhaps Mexico become a socialist country and a party that would never leave. So that's what my opinion is.
Right. Yes.
Bruce put a comment in the chat. Do you want to share that with everyone?
And I want to thank Clay and Julia for their observations and their questions and reflections on these questions. Bruce, what do you say?
Bruce, go ahead.
You know what? There's so much damn noise from the horn of the train. I'll just leave it to people's discussion here. I'm gonna remute.
Why don't you read it out, Cliff? We can hear you okay lately.
Cliff, let's see, I can probably.
Well, I can read what you put in the chat. 2 points. Great. The victory of AMLO and Morena in 2018 was a result of two powerful factors: the building of a national structure of militants, largely youth, who engaged in GOTV, get on the boat, knocking on doors, speaking in union meetings, community organizations in all 31 states about the possibility of actual change through voting. The other was the use of social media. A serious challenge to Morena right now is how to rebuild its social base that was the party's voting bloc. Many questions, including myself, a supporter of Morena in Guanajuato, how can Morena return to its base and avoid the trap of becoming simply an electoral vehicle?
Thanks, Cliff. And thanks, Bruce.
Yeah. Can you hear me through the noise here of the train? It's actually.
Yes.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. You know, I don't throw out these questions rhetorically, but they are ongoing questions that are being discussed by many people close to Morena militants, a number of leaders, national leaders in Morena now are actually very concerned about about returning to, as I mentioned, to its social base, the social movements themselves. Morena itself began as a social movement, and it was in 2014 that the membership voted whether to remain as a national movement or to become an official party so that it could engage in elections with the idea of going into a national election. Well, you know, it really is a question about what this new party that's only existed since 2014, you know, only so many years. Elections all over the country. I just learned that the state of Sinaloa, where I used to live back in the 70s and 80s, the governor is Morena. Well, I mean, lots of complicated questions here. Another one that probably most of you are aware of is that by the Constitution of Morena, any citizen over the age of 18 can join Morena. Any citizen can run, any member of Morena can run as a candidate in any election. I've put forward for a few years now, and other comrades of mine with Morena agree that given what's been going on just in the last few years, well, actually since 2018, there are opportunists from the PAN and the PRI and the PRD parties who we call chapulines, grasshoppers, who will jump from their party into Morena saying, I'm gonna go with the winning party. Well, my view is that no one who has been with any of these other parties should be allowed to run in any national election or state election or even municipal for a period of 2 years after they've joined Morena to prove their worth and their commitment, their actual commitment to Morena, what Morena stands for. But you know, that's a tricky thing. It would require a constitutional amendment of the party. So there's a lot of contradictions in Morena, and that is one, and it is one that the National School of Political Formation has been dealing with and is more forthrightly dealing with right now. And I won't go into what that's about, but so I'll leave it at that.
Well, I think that points up that there's no guarantee here that Morena is going to succeed or AMLO is going to succeed, but there's important struggle that's going around, and they're asking the right questions. You know, they don't want to see another PRD, you know, that started out with so much promise and ended up, you know, being such a disappointment. So I get that there's tension and I get that there's contradiction, but it sounds like these are mass questions that are being engaged by activists, by leaders. And I think that's what's important. And I think it's important for those on this side of the frontera to understand so we can help people understand what's going on. Because we get a lot of, you know, the mainstream media here might as well be connected with the Mexican mainstream media. You know, they just pick on everything they can to try to
Tell Bruce to
undermine
mute.
in people's minds here the legitimacy of AMLO and Morena and what they're doing. So I think it's a question of, you know, the points that are being raised are extremely important, and the outcome is not certain. But it's hopeful to me that they're being engaged and people are in motion around these questions.
Metsu has put a number of comments in the chat box. You want to bring in any of those into the discussion?
Meju, did you want to make a comment or ask a question? Hello? Is there something I said?
May I quickly just give some quick testimony on what I see in the streets here? I've seen
Yes.
many of the women's marches. My wife has participated and friends have participated here. And who is driving which part of it and how it's working on the streets and who is in complete masks and threatening other people and painting buildings, and then who's sending the police into the marches to begin the violence, and who's on which side. It is hard to understand. I don't know the answers down here, but in Morelia anyway, where it's really active for good reasons, very good reasons associated with the well-being of women, this is a really hard one to fit inside of an overall understanding of whose purposes are being served by which manifestation. Thank you, I'm finished.
Thanks, Clay.
Sue?
Did you want to ask a question or make a comment?
I missed, in terms of women, just a quick comment. I mean, as an Asian woman, I've been thinking a lot about the violence that we're up against here in the United States. Women are not safe anywhere, and we do not have as strong a machismo culture as they have in Mexico, although it's I don't know how to compare, but it's pretty bad in both places. I was just going to say, though, that it's really important that these protests continue. As we know, governments only move to the left when there is motion in the streets, and we just need to keep that up. And I think that, as we ourselves do know, sometimes when we're protesting, it's not because we think that the particular government that we're protesting is totally bad, but it's that we want them to do more. So it's a delicate balance to walk, where you are overall supportive, but you are totally against a certain policy. So I think that, you know, as revolutionaries too, we have to be able to discern what exactly our stance is toward the government that we're living under. Thanks.
Thanks, Meju.
We have questions coming from a YouTube viewer, David Schweikert. He's an issue that hasn't been drug cartels. How has AMLO been dealing?
So did people hear the question? How has AMLO been dealing with the question of the carteles? And again, I have to turn to camaradas in Mexico who I think have a better understanding of this than I. I know there was this question about creating a national guard, a national police force, because obviously the previous things were just reeking of corruption and ties with the cartel. So, and I know that they've declared an end to the war on drugs, and want to release low-level drug offenders, and there was actually a lot of, talking about the middle class, there was a lot of middle-class folks who didn't like that idea. But I'm wondering if folks in Mexico could comment on this.
Okay,
between-
Clay?
Just between that and the level of homicides, we have not seen that go down. It has not gone up. The National Guard, there are not a lot of stories that it is truly corrupt. So that beats Calderon's solution, which was creating the federal police. The federal police, we saw immense numbers of them right here in Morelia. Poorly trained boys from Mexico City who were scared and didn't know where they were from, loaded up in the back of pickup trucks and sent out all over Michoacan. It was terrible. I don't see that they have changed any of that. And I hope there's a plan. If there is one, we don't see the results yet. And of course, one of the biggest things, one of the biggest partners of the whole drug trade is the banks. We've all always known that. We saw HSBC pay a $10 billion fine just so that nobody would go to jail. Okay. I mean, we've always known that it's a huge capitalist business based in the United States. But I have not seen evidence that it is being addressed effectively from this government. It seems like they're just building the National Guard and setting them in place like down in Aguililla, but they'll set them in place, and it seems, but I only a lot of times get to see the establishment press, the Mexican establishment press, and I want to see more meat on the bones on what is being done. But I have not seen, I hope to see them. I would love to see 2 years of success, and now we've got something in place and something's going to go forward. And obviously, impunity is a big problem if you can't ever prosecute and convict anybody of anything. In terms of using, with the legalization, I live right in here, right among the universities and high schools. And Morelia is culturally a city that, in the 70s and 80s still rejected birth control pills. So there are more kids smoking pot in the streets. So does that mean that legalization is a good idea? I'm not sure. And I'm an old pot smoker. There.
Well, definitely incarceration hadn't worked. And
Yeah,
the ones
gotcha.
and the banks never get incarcerated. It's smoking pot on the streets. So I think that sounds to me like here. I know we're fighting a lot of those same fights here, and of course, most of the folks who get busted here are poor black and brown folks. So I think these are. That's why I think the issue of Morena being able to consolidate, as well as govern effectively, but to really consolidate and build out a leadership rooted in its base, and not just these old priistas and panistas, is critically important for the long term, because these are long-term issues. I mean, these carteles, they get demonized here, but we know U.S. banks are up to their neck in all this stuff. You can't bring in the kinds of drugs that we get into this country. I can walk out of here in 5 minutes. I could find it. So it's very deeply rooted, and it's deeply rooted in the relationship that Mexico has with the U.S. imperialism, which, well, it waged the war on drugs. It mostly landed in Mexico on the poor, and it's mostly landed here on poor and people of color. So I get the sense that this is going to be a very, very long term. And I'm just wondering, and you all would know this better. I know they actually started to collect tax revenues that hadn't been collected for decades and decades, and that brought in a lot of feria. So I don't know if that's a part of this. I think it's some effort to really address the great wealth inequality in Mexico. But clearly these are all very incremental steps, and creating a national police force. It's one of those ideas that may be nice in concept, very, very difficult to actually implement immediately to have an impact. And, you know, they want to do it in a way that doesn't start violating people's human rights, which is an important guideline.
Can I just make a comment? Is that okay, Cliff?
Yes.
Well, the cartels rose with the war on drugs, which was a joint venture between the Mexican and the United States government. So it can't be solved in one country alone. So I think that our role is not to think about what Mexico should do, but to think what our own government can do to stop the war on drugs, which is having repercussions in both countries, but mostly in Mexico. Stopping gun running is certainly one of the aspects of that. So yeah, I think that as activists, let's think about what can our country do to stop the war on drugs, which had to do with the militarization of the fight against drugs. Thanks.
Yep.
Okay, yes, Clay Slade.
Clay, he called on you.
Tax collection was important for the fourth transformation. And it really did start with Calderon and then through Peña Nieto, but they have continued. They had fiscal reforms that resulted in Hacienda in Mexico really getting computerized and organized in a way that has continued. Mexico, just as a government, has advanced. And ever since we moved down here, we started a little hobby business of exportation. And it was supposed to be a hobby, and unfortunately it was a success, and we're stuck with the damn thing. But we do export stuff across the border, so I have to deal with the aduanas, with the Mexican and American customs all the time. And particularly in this administration, it's gotten to where there aren't any bribes you can pay at the border anymore. There aren't any. It's really cleaned up. And in part, what it means, of course, is the government gets to collect more money, okay? And the Calderon and Peña Nieto governments were doing the same thing. It's computerized and it's based in after you have exported, you understand that customs is an amazingly detailed thing, way down deep, deep, deep in the woods on absolutely everything you ever cross the border with, and their interpretations and all of that. But this is a place, from my experience. Now, unfortunately, what it meant is you had to turn the customs over to the military. I'm an anti-war guy. There are things about military that I do not trust, okay? But the Mexican military took over all of the aduanas. Whether it was them or the system, but it's a lot, it's continued to get cleaner and cleaner. So if they don't get anything done, but they can deal with just straight corruption, then that's a good thing. Okay, put it out there in the open, make it transparent. So that part, the tax collection, corruption, and aduana thing, and the aduanas are important. They're an important source of so much money. The biggest thing in Michoacan about money is not drug money. It's the second biggest. The first biggest is the remesas.
Yeah.
You get $5 billion a year in remesas that just come back into Michoacan. That has to do with the whole migration question and the fact that we're all living together, Bill. That frontier is not real. Okay, you're in the biggest part of Mexico.
Yeah.
You're in California.
Fronteras, yeah. Well, it's funny here because you don't hear the term mordida here. We don't have that kind of. I mean, people will open their wallet when a cop's going to give them a ticket and have the $20 there, but it's not the same. We call it lobbying here. That's the form that our corruption takes.
That's corruption.
They call it lobbying, a multi-billion-dollar exercise, perfectly legal, but it's corruption, deep entrenched corruption that affects the lives of everyday people all the time. So I want to express my appreciation. I know we're kind of running up against it here, but this was a great conversation, and I really appreciated being able to be part of it.
Well, I appreciate your contribution and that of the others as well. Has been an interesting discussion. In closing, let me say that today's webinar, as well as our past programs, are available on YouTube, accessible on our website, www.globaljusticecenter.org. I hope you will join us again next Monday when we will have a talk by immigration. They will be talking about what it takes a village, one family's journey to. So tune in next Monday at 1 o'clock for what should be another very interesting discussion.
Muchísimas gracias, Cliff. And thanks to
Our
everyone.
webinar team. Pardon?
I was just saying thank you to everyone. Thank you to Cliff and the Global Justice Center, and thanks for everyone.
Yes. We're about to get off the train, I think.
Our webinar team. Thank you, Bruce.
Good.
Liz
Good to see you
Mistress, Roberto Robles, Lynn Canales, Bob Stone, Betsy Bowman, and myself. And now this is Grant. Sign until next Monday.
Ciao.